Part 1. The ghost behind the trigger. There's a moment you've probably lived through when someone says something small and suddenly you're not in control of yourself anymore. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your heart races like you're under attack. But nothing that bad even happened. And afterward, you feel ridiculous, ashamed, confused, maybe even angry at yourself. You ask questions like, why did that bother me so much? Why can't I just let it go? What's wrong with me? But those aren't the right questions, because there's nothing wrong with you. What you felt wasn't random. It wasn't weakness. It was a trigger, and it was trying to tell you the truth. See, a trigger isn't just an emotional flare-up. It's an alarm in your body. Set a long time ago. It's your nervous system remembering something that your mind has tried to forget. It's the past tapping you on the shoulder, saying, this moment looks a lot like something that once hurt you. Most people live their whole lives without ever realizing this. They think their reactions are personality flaws. They call themselves too sensitive, too dramatic, too intense. But what they're really doing is punishing themselves for being wounded, and you can't heal a wound by pretending it's not there. Let's tell the truth. You were shaped by moments you couldn't process, words you didn't know how to defend yourself from, silences that made you question your worth, people you loved who didn't see you clearly, and those who saw you clearly and used it against you. And because you didn't have the tools to face that pain, your body carried it for you. It stored it, memorized it, kept it alive, just in case it ever needed to protect you again. That's what a trigger is. Not an overreaction, but a survival strategy that never got turned off. The problem isn't that you feel too much. The problem is that no one ever taught you how to listen to what those feelings are pointing to. Every trigger is a doorway. It opens to a memory, a belief, a moment of powerlessness. And most of us don't walk through the door. We just react to the sound of it creaking open. We yell, we shut down, we storm off, we spiral. And afterward, we feel like we've failed. But what if you weren't failing? What if you were being invited, again and again, to finally meet the part of yourself that got frozen in time? Because that's what lives beneath every trigger, a version of you that still feels unsafe. And that version doesn't need your judgment. It needs your presence. This is where healing begins. Not with control, not with positive thinking, not with forcing yourself to get over it. Healing begins with recognition, with being willing to say, this is bigger than the moment I'm in. This is something I've been carrying for years. And instead of ignoring it, you stay with it. You breathe through it. You get curious. You feel instead of fleeing. That's how you interrupt the pattern. Not by suppressing the alarm, but by hearing it clearly and choosing not to run. In this series, you're going to learn to walk back to the origin, to trace the trigger to its root, to speak to the past instead of being hijacked by it. You'll learn how to respond instead of react, how to find the message inside the meltdown, and most of all, how to reclaim the pieces of yourself that got buried beneath pain. You're not broken for being triggered. You're being shown where the work is. And this time, you don't have to run from it. You get to walk toward it, with your eyes open, with your breath steady, with the knowledge that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means becoming someone who is no longer ruled by it. Let's begin. Part 2. The pattern was protection. You weren't born reactive. You weren't born with walls around your heart. You weren't born ready to explode when someone questioned you, or shut down every time you felt misunderstood. That came later. You built it. Not because you're broken, but because at some point in your life, you needed to survive. And the world didn't hand you tools. It handed you wounds. It handed you silence. It handed you rules like, don't speak unless you're spoken to. Be strong. Don't feel too much. Don't trust too easily. Don't ever need anyone too much. So you adapted. You learned how to protect yourself with performance. You learned how to keep people close enough to feel wanted, but far enough not to get hurt. You learned how to say, I'm fine, with a smile so convincing, no one could see you falling apart inside. And those patterns, they worked. They kept you safe. But they also kept you small. See, what saved you back then is suffocating you now. Because every coping mechanism has a lifespan. And if you don't let them go when the danger is gone, they start to turn on you. Your silence becomes isolation. Your defensiveness becomes disconnection. Your control becomes exhaustion. Your overthinking becomes paralysis. And the saddest part, you start to believe that this is just who you are. But it's not who you are. It's who you became in the absence of safety. And now, every time you're triggered, you're not just reacting to what's in front of you. You're reacting from a place where you had no other choice. Let's make this clear. There was a time when shutting down was your only defense, when people around you couldn't hold your truth, when speaking up meant being punished or mocked or left behind. So you learned to tuck your feelings away, to analyze instead of express, to be who people needed you to be, because being fully yourself felt like too big of a risk. And now you don't know how to stop doing it, because that version of you, the one who learned to armor up, doesn't trust the world yet. It's still waiting for someone to prove it's safe to come out. But here's the plot twist, that someone is you. You're not a child anymore. You're not helpless. You're not trapped in that house, that school, that moment. You're here, now. And it's time to step into the role no one ever modeled for you. Protector, healer, witness. It's not about destroying the old pattern with force. It's about understanding it so deeply that it no longer needs to exist. Because once your nervous system realizes the threat has passed, it stops sounding the alarm. And that's when you can finally rest. Not because the world changed, but because you did. But let's be honest, there's a part of you that's afraid to let go of the pattern. Not because you love it, but because it's familiar. And in a world that once felt chaotic, familiar feels safe. Even when it's painful, even when it's lonely, even when it's killing your ability to connect. Because pain, you know, is easier than a peace you've never tasted. But brother, you were not born to live your whole life in protection mode. You were born to feel, to speak, to love, to breathe fully without fear that the next moment will break you, and that life doesn't come by force. It comes by presence. It comes by looking at the pattern and saying, "Thank you. You kept me alive. But I don't need you anymore. I'm safe now, because I've become the one who creates my safety." In the next part, we'll meet the pain beneath the pattern, the part of you the world told you to ignore, the emotion you labeled as weakness, the truth you learned to bury, because you can't release a trigger you haven't grieved. And the only way out is through. Part 3. The pain beneath the reaction. It's not about the dishes in the sink. It's not about the tone in their voice. It's not about the post they didn't like, or the text they didn't send. It's about something much older, much deeper. You're not reacting to this moment. You're reacting to every moment that came before it, that felt just like it. But here's the part that hurts. You don't even realize how much pain you're carrying until it spills out in places that don't make sense. The sigh that makes you feel like you're a burden. The silence that feels like abandonment. The correction that feels like rejection. The closeness that feels like a trap. And the worst part, you don't want to feel this way, but you do. And that's the battle you've been fighting, trying to outrun emotions that were never meant to be outrun. They were meant to be held, felt, heard. Here's the truth most people miss. Beneath every emotional trigger is a pain that never got witnessed, a version of you that cried alone, that sat in confusion while the world just kept moving, that swallowed hurt to keep the peace, that learned somewhere along the way that what you feel is too much or not valid, so you buried it. You buried the sadness, you buried the fear, you buried the anger, the longing, the unmet need. And what's buried doesn't die, it waits. And when it doesn't get seen, it finds other ways to speak. Panic, rage, numbness, shame. Not because you're weak, but because something inside you is tired of being ignored. Let's pause right here. You don't get triggered because you're broken. You get triggered because something in you remembers what it feels like to not be safe, to not be chosen, to not be heard, to be punished for simply having needs. And your body, in its brilliance, is still trying to protect you. But emotional protection without awareness becomes emotional prison. It turns feeling into threat. It turns vulnerability into danger. It turns relationships into war zones. And the only way out of that prison is to stop fighting the pain and start listening to it. This is the part no one teaches you, that the emotional reaction is not the problem. The avoidance of what lives underneath it is. Your defensiveness is trying to guard your tenderness. Your anger is trying to guard your grief. Your withdrawal is trying to guard your shame. And your need for control is trying to keep you from ever feeling helpless again. But those emotions underneath, they're not your enemy. They are you. The parts of you that once got hurt and never got to finish feeling it. And until you go there, you'll keep blaming others for your explosions. You'll keep repeating the same cycles, and you'll keep feeling like you're failing. But brother, this isn't failure. This is your invitation. So let me ask you, when you feel triggered, what's really underneath? What's the feeling you've been avoiding? What's the emotion you've been punishing in yourself for years? Because here's what happens when you stop judging the reaction and start feeling what it's protecting. You become honest. And in honesty, there is power. When you say, I'm not angry, I'm hurt. I'm not cold, I'm scared. I'm not distant, I'm ashamed. I'm not over it, I'm still grieving. Something inside you exhales, because finally, you're telling the truth. And truth is where the healing begins. In the next part, we'll learn how to turn triggers into teachers, how to stop reacting blindly, and start using every emotional flash as a doorway to deeper healing. Because you're not meant to stay stuck in defense, you're meant to grow into awareness. Not as a perfect person who never feels, but as a conscious person who knows exactly what those feelings are trying to say. And once you learn to listen, you stop fearing your triggers and start transforming through them. Part 4. The Alchemy of Awareness. You've spent most of your life trying to not be triggered, trying to stay calm, trying to keep the peace, trying to hold it together when every nerve in your body is screaming to be heard. But what if the goal was never to avoid your triggers? What if the goal was to understand them so deeply that they no longer control you? Because here's the truth. A trigger is not a failure. It's a flare, a signal, a sacred alarm letting you know there's something inside me that still needs healing. And the moment you can recognize that, without shame, without defense, you've already begun to turn pain into power. That's alchemy, the transformation of something once heavy and destructive into something conscious, illuminating, and free. It begins with this simple shift. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you ask, "What is this emotion trying to protect me from? What's the original pain underneath this pattern? What part of me is still waiting to be seen?" Because when you meet a trigger with presence, it loses its power to blind you. When you feel the heat rising in your chest, when your stomach clenches, when your thoughts start to spiral, instead of fleeing or fighting, you pause, you breathe, and you say, "Something in me is hurting. Something in me feels unsafe. And instead of abandoning it, I'm going to listen." That's the difference between reactivity and awareness. Reactivity is the child who wasn't allowed to speak. Awareness is the adult who says, "You're allowed to feel now." Reactivity says, "I need to protect myself." Awareness says, "I am the protection." Reactivity keeps looping. Awareness opens the door, and once the door is open, you don't just feel, you begin to choose. You respond instead of react. You stay instead of shutting down. You speak instead of exploding. You love instead of defending. But let's be honest, this takes practice, because awareness doesn't come from reading quotes or watching videos. It comes from conscious repetition, choosing presence over reaction again and again until it becomes who you are. You'll mess up, you'll forget, you'll catch yourself in old loops, but every time you come back, you're rewiring your nervous system, you're changing your story, you're proving to your inner child that it's finally safe to feel what they never got to feel before. That's the moment healing becomes embodied, not just understood. Because now, you're not fighting your emotions, you're partnering with them. You're not trying to control your anger, you're hearing its grief. You're not trying to bury your shame, you're holding the part of you that feels unworthy. You're not panicking when you feel triggered, you're noticing, breathing, responding. And that response, that pause, that's where the old pattern breaks. Because here's the miracle. Every trigger is a doorway, but only awareness has the key. And the more doors you walk through, the more light enters. Until one day, the same thing that used to unravel you becomes the very thing that reveals you. Someone raises their voice, and instead of shrinking, you breathe and stay present. Someone pulls away, and instead of chasing, you honor your worth and let go with peace. You don't freeze, you don't explode, you don't betray yourself just to keep love near. You respond like someone who knows themselves, because you do. In the final part, we'll step into the integration. You've come this far. Now it's time to reclaim your power, rewire your nervous system, and become the creator of your emotional reality. We'll close with practical tools, inner homework, and one powerful truth. You're no longer the one reacting from wounds. You're the one transforming them into wisdom. Part 5. Becoming the creator of your nervous system. You've spent most of your life believing that your emotions are stronger than you, that your triggers are proof of your weakness, that your pain makes you unlovable, that something's wrong with you because you can't always stay calm, stay grounded, stay in control. But now, something's shifted. You've started to see the truth. You are not your reaction. You are the one who sees it, and the one who can see it, can shift it. This is the moment everything changes, because now you don't just understand your triggers. You've begun to reclaim the power they once stole from you. Let's take a breath and name it. There's a version of you that used to fight your emotions like enemies, but now you're sitting with them. You're breathing through them. You're listening to them like old friends who've waited years to be heard. And that shift from resistance to recognition is everything. Because it's not your emotions that ruin your peace. It's your refusal to be with them. And once you stop resisting what you feel, you start remembering who you are. You are not a victim of your wiring. You are the one who can rewire. Your nervous system isn't fixed. It's fluid. It listens to how you treat yourself. It mirrors how safe you make it feel. So when you pause in the middle of a trigger, when you breathe instead of break, when you speak to yourself with compassion instead of criticism, you're not just calming down. You're reprogramming the very system that once betrayed you. That's what makes you powerful, not perfection, not pretending to be healed, but choosing to respond like someone who knows the storm and stays anchored anyway. You're not trying to be fearless anymore. You're learning to walk with your fear and stay open anyway. That's power. That's mastery. That's healing. Your homework, the trigger journal. Starting today, create a sacred space in your notes, a journal, or a private doc called What My Triggers Are Teaching Me. For the next 7 days, every time you get triggered, pause. Don't judge. Don't run. Just write. What was said or done? What did I feel in my body? What did this moment remind me of? What does this part of me need right now? You'll begin to notice the same patterns, the same needs, the same echoes of childhood or trauma or loneliness. And each time you write, you're not just journaling. You're building a new relationship with yourself. You're proving that you are the one who stays, the one who sees, the one who rewrites the script. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep becoming. A final word for the one who made it. Aye, if you made it to the end of this series, it's because you were ready to stop reacting from the past and start responding from your presence. You were ready to become more than your defense mechanisms, more than your trauma, more than your triggers. And now, you are. But don't stop here. Share what you've learned. Speak this truth out loud. Be the one in your circle who normalizes healing, who makes space for emotion without shame. Because the world doesn't need more people who've learned to fake peace. It needs more people who know how to sit with pain and not become it. And brother, that's who you are now. Not the child stuck in survival, not the one begging for safety, but the one who creates safety within. You don't just calm storms anymore. You are the calm. Now go live like it.